I'm Brandon Amoroso, and this is the D2Z Podcast, building and growing your business from a Gen Z perspective. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to D2Z, a podcast about using the Gen Z mindset to grow your business. I'm Gen Z entrepreneur Brandon Amoroso, founder and president of retention as a service agency Electric, as well as the co-founder of Scaleless. And today I'm talking with David Heacock, who's the founder and CEO of Filterbuy, which is a leading direct-to-consumer indoor air quality company. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So before we jump into things here, can you give everybody just a quick background on yourself and Filterbuy?
Sure. I'm from Talladega, Alabama originally. Kind of fast forward and went to work on Wall Street, where I was an options trader at Goldman Sachs, and when I was 29, decided that I wanted to do something else and ended up buying a family industrial supply business that I was not entirely clear what I was going to do with it, but I looked for a product that I could sell direct to consumer and manufacture in Talladega, my hometown, and ultimately settled on pleated air filters. And that was the genesis for Filterbuy. And we're now about a $250 million a year, primarily direct to consumer air filter manufacturer that has locations in 7 different states and ships across the country.
That's some impressive scale and quite the career transition.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur from an early age, and I spent most of my early days exploring things like affiliate marketing and all types of advertising strategies kind of in my spare time. Had a lot of side hustles in that kind of general realm. So it's not quite as random as it looks. It was definitely an evolution over time.
And how did you go about, deciding on air filters?
Well, I was looking for a product that I could manufacture competitively in Alabama and not have to compete with imports. That was incredibly important to me. In the industrial supply business that I had bought, I saw that we were effectively the middleman. We were buying from big companies and selling to other companies and competing with big companies like Grainger or Uline or whatnot, and we were not really competitive. So I really wanted a product that I could build, that I could manufacture and sell direct to end user, with the idea that if I could do that competitively, nobody could outcompete me. And that ultimately led me to the air filter market.
And are you completely vertically integrated?
Yes, as vertically integrated as you can be. I mean, we buy raw materials and make a finished good out of them. So we obviously have frame manufacturers and media manufacturers and things of that nature, but we're completely vertically integrated from a product production and sales perspective.
And from like a direct to consumer standpoint, are you primarily selling through like your own website? Are you selling through marketplaces? What is the
We do all in our direct-to-consumer business. We do all of the above. So about 60% of our business ends up originating on marketplaces, which is about consistent with online search behavior. If you were to look at it, about 60 or 65% of online product search behavior ends up on marketplaces, primarily on Amazon, and the rest comes up from our website.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. I have a lot of questions, but one of the things that really jumped out to me when I went to your website was the Jeep Wrangler, and the sweeps. And I've heard really great things about sweeps, and I've heard really negative things about sweeps. How have you come upon like deciding that that's going to be your lead sort of capture method? And what does that whole process look like from your side?
Yeah, it's something that we started exploring this year, and we're actually going to really lead into it next year. So we're going to do a lot more of this. For us, it's purely a brand building type play. I think that within the direct to consumer world, there are all different types of products. We are in a consumable commodity necessity product, right? Which is very different than, maybe a clothing product or some type of toy or, some type of nice to have gadget. So for us, social marketing is kind of difficult, right? Because it's not something that I'm going to be able to show up in your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed and you say, hey, I'm going to buy my air filter today, because it's one of these things that either you need it or you don't. And when you do need it, you have a very short consideration window, right? And so, for us, the traditional Facebook type marketing doesn't really work. But we need ways to increase our brand awareness and increase our top of the funnel. And for us, the giveaways are an easy way to do that, because we just want to be considered when you are in market for our product, right? And so having that giveaway allows us to get your information and just remind you that we exist. And then when it comes time, or when you have the need, then we are the first place that you think of, hopefully. And that's the strategy behind it. And we've seen some success with that so far.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you're definitely a unique product within, like, your traditional, D2C brands that are out there. There's like endless, coffee brands, endless, skincare and beauty brands. Um, what would you say the competitive sort of landscape and dynamic looks like on your end when it comes to, the air filter market? Is it?
Yeah. Well, to contrast us to, say, a beauty brand, as you just articulated, there are lots of kind of private label manufacturers of beauty products, for instance, or any of these other products that you're talking about. And because of that, then what ends up happening is the only advantage that somebody has is ultimately brand. And so that's why you see a lot of these celebrity type endorsements that are driving product sales for products like that. For us, we're actually in a very logistically complex business. And because of that complexity ultimately gives us an edge. It would be very difficult for somebody to go out and find a contract manufacturer of air filters, but then more importantly, to be able to warehouse them and then ship them at scale and be competitive with us, because we manufacture 100,000 units of our product a day and ship them in an average of 4.5, from a customer perspective to that end user. So there's a lot of logistics involved that go behind that. And that's really where our competitive advantage lies. It is not something that somebody can just go and find a contract manufacturer and say, hey, I'm going to be in the air filter business. Whereas I look at a lot of these, traditional direct to consumer brands, they really are not offering any value other than marketing. And so marketing becomes their differentiator. And that's a pretty difficult way to survive over a long period of time from my perspective.
Yeah, it reminds me, I had an internship in high school at a company called PCA, which is one of the few paper manufacturing
Yep.
companies in the world. And it costs like $1 billion to build a paper plant. So it wasn't exactly a hyper competitive industry. And it's not like you could just, snap your fingers and somehow you would have, a paper company. And air filters are definitely not at the top of my mind if I were going to think about building a new D2C ecom brand. It would not be the first product category that I would be looking at.
Yeah, I think that the takeaway that everybody needs to get from that, though, is that you need to be able to articulate and understand your competitive advantage in business. Like why is it that you uniquely exist, and why are you the person to solve that problem? And I think we all have kind of things that suit us, or the things that we have a unique understanding of that maybe somebody else doesn't, and that allow us to have that competitive edge. And for me, it was ultimately, coming from a small town where, had a manufacturing base, and kind of being able to utilize that and that infrastructure to be able to go on this unique path where I saw an opportunity. But everybody has their own, unique skill sets or unique superpowers that they have to tap into in order to be able to carve out a niche that has a competitive moat over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. From a marketing standpoint, though, albeit you do have that competitive advantage when it comes to everything that you just mentioned, but you still have obviously you have your TikTok, you have some other social channels that most of the companies that we just discussed are reliant upon when it comes to creating their differentiation. How do you think about? Is it similar to the sweepstakes, where you're building that awareness, even though the consideration and buying window is very small, and that's why you're investing in some of these channels like TikTok and others?
Yeah, I mean, like, if you were to look at our marketing spend, and we spend tens of millions of dollars a year on marketing, the vast majority of it is what I would call intent-based marketing. So that means somebody is in market for a product and is searching for that, and we are capturing demand in that. And if you want to be able to do that at scale, you have to have good economics. And because we are completely vertically integrated, we have the economics that allow us to compete in that, marketplace of, searching air filters on Google or certain sizes on Amazon or whatnot, which is very large. We're able to compete at that at scale and win because we have those competitive advantages, right? So that's the largest portion of our marketing spend and where that money goes. And then we do experiment with the Facebooks and the TikToks and whatnot of the world, but as a percentage of our marketing budget, it's very small, and we view that as top of the funnel brand awareness. Making sure that people know who we are, and that's how we justify that type of marketing spend.
How do you sort of deal with the measurement and attribution of your marketing efforts when you are selling a lot on marketplaces like in Amazon, and not all the sales are coming directly through your website? Because I know that's been a challenge for some companies as they get more omni-channel. It's like measuring that halo effect and trying to understand where the actual transaction is taking place versus where the advertising was most effective and actually captured that consumer intent.
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, is really an art more than a science. I mean, there really is no perfect way to do that. In Amazon world, for instance, you do have ways of tracking external marketing that leads to sales. I mean, they do actually have the functionality for you to do that now, at least in the last couple of years. So we measure everything that we can when it's something that we can measure. But if we're doing just brand awareness, top of the funnel type stuff, we're really looking at marketing spend as a percentage of sales and looking at that over a few month forward basis. And we have different models that we kind of utilize to just take a guess as to what the impact is. But anybody that's giving you exact numbers in that world is I think not being factually honest. But we have an established framework for thinking about these, and I think it's important to spend the time just understanding what is your framework going to be, how are you going to measure it, so that you at least when you're tweaking something, you're doing it with as much information as you possibly can. And so we use Amazon QuickSight, which is a business intelligence tool that we actually take down all of our Google Analytics data and all of our transactional data and use that to then build a model that allows us to attribute this based off of different factors to the best of our ability, given the data that we have access to.
How do you, I got one or two more questions for you that are specific to ecom, and then I would definitely want to talk a lot about, how you've scaled the company because, you're quite a sizable organization. And, I had my own pain points when building my first business that I definitely want to pick your brain on. But I noticed you have a subscription program on your website, and a lot of the people that are listening also have a subscription business, albeit for, most likely different products. When did you launch that? How do you get people to buy into I want to be on a subscription program for an air filter, which is not necessarily the first thing that would come top of mind for me when thinking about a subscription program?
Yeah, we've had a subscription from the very beginning. We started about the same time as, say, like a Dollar Shave Club or a Harry's, and so that was definitely something that was top of mind when I was founding it and thinking about it. And originally, I thought subscription was going to be a huge driver for us, and it's extremely important. It's about 15 to 20% of our revenue comes from subscriptions, and that's a very sticky 15 to 20%. But the problem in the air filter market is that the economics don't really lend itself to a subscription model, because it cost us about the same to ship you 6 filters as it does 1 filter. And so and ultimately we have to pass that shipping cost on to a consumer, right? So you'll see that we give consumers meaningful discounts the more that they buy, because the shipping economics are that way. And so because of that, our average subscription is about 9 months, because people are generally buying about 9 months, which is 4 to 6 filters, depending on, how many units you have and how often you change them. And so on average, that's when a consumer purchases from us on a subscription. But it's really not as meaningful for us as I originally would have thought when we went into it, because of the shipping economics. So for everybody is different. Like if you have like a supplement for something like that, where it's very cheap to ship, then a consumer probably is happy buying it once a month from you, because you're not going to give them that much a discount if they buy a year's supply at a time. Whereas we're in a position that we can pass on a significant discount the more that you're willing to buy in one go. And because of that, that actually discourages people from subscriptions. But for us, as an aside, like our business to business market is actually where we see more success with the subscriptions because they're generally having to buy more at a time and are changing them more often. And so subscription lends itself more to kind of the small business world than it does the, direct to consumer residential.
Do you have a completely different sort of experience and insight for those B2B purchasers, or is it all funneling through the same sort of front end e-com experience?
Well, the small business B2B customers oftentimes use the same front end experience that you might see. But like one of our biggest growth opportunities and where, we've invested heavily in the last year and a half is hiring a outside sales team that just focuses on business to business customers. So it's kind of separate from our direct to consumer business. So we have about 30 outside salespeople that call on, hotels and gyms and industrial complexes and car companies and kind of run the gamut of all these industrial type companies that use air filters. And that customer base has a completely different kind of sales platform that is hosted on filterbuy.com, but when you log in, they have the ability to get quantity discounts and appropriate pricing based off of whatever volume it is that they're ordering.
Got it. Got it. That's a nice segue into your team and how you've thought about sort of growing and scaling that, because you mentioned outside sales team. So how do you determine at this point, whether it's a function or a role that you're going to internalize and actually bring like in-house, or something that you're going to look to external parties to, spin up?
At this point, we mostly in-house anything that's meaningful enough to, be worth doing. And that's kind of an advantage of being our size now is that, it doesn't make sense to outsource too many aspects of our business. But early on, that might have been quite different. For me, it ultimately comes to when can you budget or when can you afford to hire a really solid manager that has a lot of experience in the function that you are looking out to build. And once you have the budget to be able to budget for that, as well as the team members that they're going to need to hire, that's when it makes sense to make that investment internally and internalize it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. That was similar to how I built the agency. As soon as we had enough money coming through that particular channel, that's when there was the department head and then the investment in the team members that would come underneath that person. But until then, it was all outsourced or other things like that. As we sort of scrappily grew and grew the business. So that definitely makes sense. When it comes to
Makes perfect sense.
when you were first starting out and creating this company, because obviously the way that you think about things and do things right now are a lot different when you're at the size and scale that you are. But when you were first starting the business, what were some of the biggest pain points or challenges that you had that you didn't necessarily expect?
Well, for me, the earliest challenges were manufacturing related. I significantly underestimated just how challenging it is to build and operate a manufacturing business in the U.S. in the time frame that I started it. I was very naive going into that.
Mhm.
So in retrospect, I think I kind of bit off more than I probably should have. And, I would not have the energy to go back and start that exact type of process again. But that was the thing that I underestimated by far the most, was just how tricky manufacturing the product at scale was going to be.
Got it. And from a team perspective, as you've been scaling and growing, are you fully in person? Are you remote? Are you hybrid? How have you dealt with some of the ramifications that have come out of the COVID period, when it comes to where your team's located, how you like keep and build that company culture and ethos?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's one that a lot of us are wrestling with and struggling with. We have about 1,000 employees, and the vast majority of them are located in one of our manufacturing facilities. Right? You can't be a remote manufacturing employee, so that by definition those are in person jobs. But we do have about a 70-person corporate and management team now that really came to age during COVID. Like most of those jobs and people did not exist before COVID. So because of that, a lot of those hires were remote, and so we have a pretty kind of robust remote workforce. In the last couple of years, we've started to have two centers, one in West Palm Beach, Florida, where I'm based, and one in Atlanta, Georgia, where my chief of staff is. And we're mostly hiring in those centers for any new corporate roles, but we still have, a pretty remote workforce. And because of that, we do try to have quarterly get-togethers with each of those remote teams, so that teams do have some in-person interaction. But it's you know we're kind of figuring it out as we go along, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think the cat's sort of out of the bag when it comes to that side of things, especially if a lot of the growth happened during COVID. It's similar to my
Yeah.
previous business. We ended up in like 12 different states. And at this point, it's very hard to then centralize upon a few locations, because then people either have to move or the people have to change. Whereas if you're starting a business from scratch today, it's a lot different. You can be a little bit more intentional with the hiring that you're doing. But we were all San Diego, and then COVID hit, and then now all of a sudden we're in 13 different states, and there's no really going back, it feels
Yeah.
like, to in person.
Yeah, I mean, I think for every company and every situation is going to be different, and I think ultimately we all have to figure out what works best for our, you know, situation. I don't know that there is a right or a wrong. I do think in-person interaction for certain jobs and certain roles is extremely important. Like I just brought a CFO in-house here with me in West Palm, because that's a critical function, and it's really important to have that kind of regular interaction and trust, to be honest with you. And so for those types of roles, I think in person is really important. Whereas, like for development roles and things of that nature, it's probably less important, because you can kind of track people and track progress in more measurable ways. And it's that allows people to work at their own pace or at their leisure and whatnot, and ultimately leads to more productive workforces in those areas. So I think you just have to figure out, based on the role in your company, what makes the most sense for you.
When it comes to like your commerce stack, um, how much of it is build versus buy? Are you investing a lot in sort of creating custom solutions, or are you trying to leverage off the shelf technologies as much as possible?
Yeah, so I started the business off a completely custom backend and basically managed that myself. And like going back to your subscription question earlier, believe it or not, when I started the business, Shopify did not have a good subscription solution. It was not native, and you didn't have the third party solutions that you have now on a platform like that. So part of the reason why we did not start on a Shopify install in the beginning was because they would not offer subscriptions, and subscriptions was extremely important to me. And so I use that as an example, because early on, we did not have the luxury of having a lot of these third-party tools that exist today. And so we actually built our own custom-built system that we still use for all of our warehousing and order management and all of our core functions. But then we will hook into third parties where it makes sense, or where there's a solution that's been put in place for us. But we would much prefer to use a third party solution in a lot of cases. But as our tools developed, a lot of times there was not a third party solution at that time, which caused us to create an internal solution for that. But if I was starting today, I think I could build a business almost solely on third party solutions, and it's likely what I would do.
Do you envision yourself, migrating some of those components that you've built in house to third-party solutions over the next, 3 to 5 years, or do you think that you'll continue to like invest in some of the proprietary technology that you're leveraging to run the business?
I think for us, it will continue to be a hybrid, because, like when I talk about our core systems, I'm really talking about our, order processing and warehouse management and stuff that we've really made very efficient for our specific business. So, it's not the kind of thing we could go and buy off the shelf. And since we've already built it to where we are today, it's something we're going to continue to manage and build on our own. But like we're really investing heavy in a service business on top of our air filter business. For instance, like we have a HVAC service business in South Florida that we intend to take nationwide called Filterbuy HVAC Solutions. And in that, we use a third-party software called Service Titan, which is basically is big in the service industry. It's like an ERP for service businesses. And so in that, and when making that investment, we are deciding to use third-party tools from the get-go. And so that's kind of how I see it going. We'll continue to invest in maintaining our kind of core functionality for our core business, but as we expand into other things, we're going to leverage third-party technology as much as reasonably possible.
Yeah, it feels like for the more like niche product categories that have very specific requirements, the proprietary technology is almost necessitated because, to our earlier point, there's thousands of skincare brands out there. And so it makes sense that, a Shopify would be able to easily support their needs. But the needs of a business like yours are far more complex and more specific. And so it would make sense that they don't have, some of those features and functionality just off the shelf.
Correct. And it's part of our secret sauce, to be honest with you. I mean, like I said, we manufacture 100,000 pleated air filters a day, and we ship them, in 20,000 or so boxes to end customers at the end of every single day. And, we keep about 2 weeks of finished goods inventory in our whole system, and we're constantly making product to, replenish inventory and keep those levels where they need to be. And in order to do that, takes a lot of moving pieces that, we've developed a custom system to allow us to do that. And, that's part of the reason why we have the competitive advantage that we do.
Would you ever license any of your technology? Because a recent trend I've been seeing, even from some like VC investments, is in buying or having a business where you develop proprietary technology to better effectively like service your customers. But I'll use like a pool cleaning company as an example. So there's somebody I'm connected with who they bought a pool cleaning company, and now they've built technology for that pool cleaning company to be able to better service its customers. And now they're licensing it to other pool cleaning companies. Is there anything, comparable or similar here that you would ever think about doing?
Yeah, when I was younger and maybe more ambitious or naive, depending on how you look at it, I would have said yes, and now I would tell you no. Partially because we're a unique business. Like you're not going to go out and find another business specifically like ours, and I don't think that there's a huge market for a lot of those things that we've actually built because it's kind of a one of one use case. But also, I've become increasingly convinced that AI and what's coming in that world is going to basically make all of these things obsolete in a 5-year or so time horizon, because it's going to allow companies like us and yours or anybody to create custom built tools in a way less intense way than it's been required in the past. So the ironic thing about AI, I believe, is going to be that a lot of the complexity or things that have kept people from building custom tools in the past is now going to be unlocked because it's going to be so much easier to have purpose-built solutions. And so I would be very nervous to go and be investing heavily in a SaaS type of software business that did not have a big competitive moat of some kind, because I think it's going to change a lot over the coming years. So I would be reluctant to go too heavy into that personally.
Yeah, I was out in San Francisco, I want to say 2 weeks ago for Tech Week. And it was interesting listening to one of the talks about how to build a moat as a business. And there's sort of the old way where there's high switching costs and there's network effects. But the new way is in data, because everybody has access to the same LLMs, the same AI. But if you have a proprietary data set that Google can't see, or any of these massive AI providers cannot have access to, then that is really your competitive moat. Is you have data that can then train the models to be able to be more effective in whatever you're actually doing.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting how the business building or creation of that moat is changing over time with AI.
The corollary to that, which is why, I'm in the business I'm in and intend to really focus the rest of my life on building it, is that I think that, it's going to be a long time before you have AI robots that are, say, installing an HVAC system, and things of that nature. And so, I'm really focused on building the most efficient company that allows me to offer those types of services at scale. So you become a bridge between the technology and the AI that it takes to run these things efficiently and the people that are actually making these services or these products happen. And so, I think that that's where I see the biggest opportunity is actually that intersection between the people that are actually doing services and whatnot, and building the systems that allow you to do that efficiently at scale through technology.
Yeah, it feels like AI is really at this point sort of disproportionately impacting your traditional knowledge workers, and it hasn't really touched the service industries, which are also woefully understaffed. At least has been my experience, in Miami dealing with house remodels, contractors, things like that. There's no plumbers, there's no electricians, there's no availability of any of these resources, and it makes me think, when I have kids and they're, going to be that age to go to college, are they actually going to go to college? Or are they going to go to trade school? Are they going to, look at other alternatives that, you know, 10 years ago was sort of your golden ticket. If you got an undergraduate degree from a esteemed university, you were sort of off and on your way. I don't think that is going to be the case for very much longer.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and it's why I'm in the business I'm in. And like in our HVAC business, we have a big apprenticeship program where we're taking people that went to a basic training trade school, and then giving them the skills that they need to be effective technicians for a company like ours. And that type of training and skill building, I think, is so as a place that way we as a company can differentiate ourselves. But I think that there's going to be more and more demand for that type of work in the future, and so it's why I'm trying to get ahead of it.
What are some of the other things that you're doing to sort of hedge your bets, with or against AI as it continues to rapidly progress here? I mean, even with my new business, there's things that we're doing today that are only possible as of 3 months ago, both from like a product development standpoint, but also things we're just doing internally as a company. Um, how are you leveraging it, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first you have to be self-aware about, hey, is my business going to be replaced by this anytime soon, and like, where am I vulnerable? So we all need to take internal look at that and say, maybe I need to rethink my strategy or what my mode is. So that's the first thing I think we all have to do. But for us, and for me internally, I'm constantly looking at our teams and our systems and our processes and saying, is there a way that we can do this better or more efficiently? And that, as you say, changes quite often. And so, like, whether that be within customer service, or whether that be within the tech tools that you're using and building, and the sizes of the teams that are needed to do that, making sure that you have people that are focused on understanding what is possible and implementing that quickly with a quick bias to action is really critical, I think, if you want to scale and survive. And it's something that we do religiously here, and it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about and studying myself.
How has your role evolved, since you've founded this company back in 2012 to today, as your team has gotten bigger and bigger? Because I've met with a lot of founders who have trouble, delegating, or, transitioning from what they were doing to what they need to be doing as the business continues to grow. So what does that evolution look like for you, and how have you been able to manage and handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I've always done the best job of it, to be honest with you. I think a lot of times I've been that founder that does have a tough time walking away, because I know every little nitty gritty aspect of this business, and basically have done every job that any employee currently does at some point in my history. But I will say, in the last 18 months, I've really leveled up my management team, and consciously went out and found people to help me to hone in certain processes of our business. And that's really what has now allowed me to take my vision even bigger. And I'm on a mission to build the world's leading indoor air quality company, and I'm documenting that through YouTube. And we started that about 2 weeks ago, and it's something I'm spending more and more of my time on. And really, the process over the last 18 months of going through every major department and bringing in a solid leader that has experience doing something that similar to what they're being tasked with here has really been game changing for me, and is what is allowing me to kind of think bigger and invest in bigger projects than I ever have before.
One last question for you. in 10, 20 years from now, what is like your sort of North Star? What does success look like for you as a business owner? And like, what are some of the motivations that lead into that as well? Because I think, there's quite a few people that look at entrepreneurship for all the ritz and glamour that might be portrayed in the media. But more often than not, it's a shit sandwich of, a daily grind. So,
Yep.
what gets you up out of bed every morning, and, what does that like 10, 20-year North Star look like for you?
Well, the last couple of years, I really did a lot of soul searching. I was kind of trying to answer that question for myself. I just turned 41 years old, and you're thinking, well, I built this big business. I could sell it and retire and live happily ever after. Is that what I should be doing? Is that what I want? And I realized that for me, it's important to wake up every day with a mission and a purpose. And I really believe that you can impact the world by how you interact with the people around you and how you build opportunities for those people around you. It's very important to me. And I decided that I wanted to be building something for the rest of my life. And if I sold it now, then I would probably always regret it, because you never really can recreate that kind of first baby that you build in business. And I've seen a lot of people try and fail at that, and it's something that I wasn't interested in doing. And so that's how I ultimately came to my mission, which is to build the world's leading indoor air quality company. And I spent the first 12 years of my business career not sharing anything on social media, not having any social media presence or web presence at all. But now I actually want to share my mission with the world, show people how I'm doing it, show exactly what you said. Entrepreneurship, to use your words, can be a shit sandwich, and that's oftentimes reality. And I want to show that. I want people to understand that, because if they're going to go on a big journey, they got to be prepared to withstand that and live with that. And I think that there is so much fakeness out there, and so going to document my journey of building something big, multi-billion-dollar a year indoor air quality business. And I want to take people along for the ride, good and bad. And for me, that journey is something that gets me out of bed every day, and I'm excited for, and that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah, that transparency is awesome, because if you went on LinkedIn, you would think that everybody had $1 billion company and that money was raining from the sky. Which, I mean, I'm definitely not saying that I'm any different. You're not rewarded for being transparent and showing the negatives, because that's not the way that the current like social framework is set up. Um, but I always joke with my brother, who's a co-founder in this business, like, it'll be really funny in 5 to 10 years, once we're sort of through this stage, and we're past having to portray that on social media, like being able to share and shed some of the light around some of those days where you're like, holy shit, how am I going to make payroll today? Or something happened with a team member, and all of the sort of nitty gritty behind the scenes that nobody actually talks about or is public with, because it could potentially be damaging to what you're trying to achieve in that particular moment.
Yeah. Well, part of the advantage now is I have a big enough company with big enough scale, and don't have any investors that I have to answer to, and I'm in a unique position to be able to share more than I think than the average person can. And my challenge is to be really authentic as I show it and take people through it, both good and bad. I mean, and obviously there are some things you can't share because you might get sued, or impact people and whatnot. And so, I mean, full transparency is not realistic, but I do think that we can all be honest about what it really takes to run a business and to scale a business, and it's not for everybody. And I think people need to understand that, because I think a lot of people get sucked in that probably would be better off being the second or third in command at some other business, and not having to deal with the with what it really takes to scale a business. And I think people need to work on that self-awareness.
Yeah, I heard a term the other day called intrapreneur, where it's somebody who is very passionate about like entrepreneurship, but they don't necessarily want to take on like the risk associated with it, or some of the stressors that come with it. And so they join early stage startups, or they'd even join an organization like yours, where they're provided the platform and the framework of which to innovate, but without some of the negatives that come with having to run the whole ship.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for a lot of people, that is a very smart strategy, and I would counsel, a lot of people in that, to do that. But I want to show people an example of what's possible, and if you want to sign up for it and you have the stomach for it, then you need to dream bigger, and that's kind of, um, the example that I want to show.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing all these insights with us. Really amazing what you've done so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing you build that $1 billion company. Um, Before we hop, though, can you let everybody know where they can connect with you online, where they can follow along with this journey of yours as well on YouTube and whatnot?
Yep, I'm just David Filterbuy on all platforms. So if you go to David Filterbuy on YouTube, you'll find me. We've posted our first couple of episodes, but every week we're updating you on our journey and going to take you along for the ride. So I'd appreciate it if you followed me.
Awesome. Well, again, I appreciate you taking the time. For everybody listening, as always, this is Brandon Amoroso. You can find me at brandonamoroso.com or scalus.ai. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.